Thanks, Roach. And Olivia, very well done the way you answered that last question. Perfect segue into what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully you'll be able to see this. Can everybody see that? Yeah, I can see nods. Great. Right. Brilliant. So lovely to be here, everybody. Nice to talk to you all. My name's Adam McGibbon. I'm the UK campaign lead for Market Forces. Market Forces is an international environmental organization. Just started in the UK about a year and a half ago. And it's been going for about 9 years. Started in Australia and it's branched out from there. And as Ruth said, we tackle the finance that's behind polluting industry. So our aim is to shift finance out of activities that harm the environment, chiefly fossil fuels. So let's get right into what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about the problems that we face, some solutions to them, what Market Force is doing, and what you can do. So I'm going to talk about two big problems. First of all, this is problem number one. This is probably one of the most important graphs in the world. This is from an organization called Oil Change International, who used data from a variety of very reputable sources, including the International Energy Agency, to figure out the world's carbon budget versus how much coal, oil, and gas and other high carbon materials are in the world's reserves. So if you look on the right here, you'll see those two orange-red gradient bars. That's the world's carbon budget. And what I mean by carbon budget is that is the amount of carbon dioxide that we can emit and still stay within those crucial Paris Agreement goals of keeping warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius below industrial levels and 2 degrees Celsius. So that's what that is. If you look on the left, what you can see here is that the world's developed reserves of coal, oil, and gas. And what I mean by developed is I mean from fields and plants and mines already in operation. The developed reserves of those mines and fields, the emissions from that is more than we can safely emit while keeping underneath that carbon budget. So what that tells us is that even if we burn everything, that's currently in development, never mind the stuff that they're thinking about bringing on board, new oil fields, new gas fields, new coal mines, even the stuff that we're currently getting out of the ground from developed fields and mines, if we burn all of that, we blow those carbon budgets. So the lesson there is we can't even burn the stuff that we're already getting out of the ground. So huge problem. It's really just important to be aware of that. Second problem is that even though we can't burn all the stuff that we're already getting out of the grounds, the world's financial institutions are pumping billions upon billions upon billions, trillions in fact, into the fossil fuel industry to expand it at a time when the fossil fuel industry needs to shrink. So we know that the 60 largest banks in the world have pumped 3.8 trillion US dollars into the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. We also know who those people are. So this graph here from the Rainforest Action Network's report, Banking on Climate Chaos, which comes out every year, shows us who those culprits are. So largely chief players are North American banks, JP Morgan Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, Bank of America hitting the top spots there, then the Royal Bank of Canada, MUFG, a Japanese bank. But we see Barclays up there. Barclays, a key British brand, number 7 in the world, biggest fossil fuel funder in Europe. And below those top 12, there are lots of other British banks, Standard Chartered, HSBC, NatWest, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, I want to draw your attention to UK banks in particular, because in the UK, we have got massive, not only got massive historical responsibility for climate change, we've done a tremendous amount of emitting. We started the Industrial Revolution. But as well as that, our finance sector in the present day has got a massive, massive carbon footprint. A report by WWF that came out last year demonstrated that if the City of London, that is the UK's financial centre, if it was a country all of itself, the emissions that it finances through its banks, insurance companies, its asset managers would be double Britain's actual carbon footprint. So it's absolutely massive, absolutely massive. And as people in the global north with relative power in the world, we've got a responsibility to do something about it. So how do we actually do something about it? Well, to borrow the very famous line from All the President's Men, we need to follow the money, because the fossil fuel industry can't function without the financial industry. The financial industry doesn't need the fossil fuel industry, but the fossil fuel industry needs the financial industry. So we focus on banks and insurance companies and asset management companies and try and chase them out of fossil fuels, because we know that removing that flow of money means that the pollution has to stop. And we do that through a variety of means. So we take out shares in some of these companies if they're publicly listed on stock exchanges. We turn up to the annual general meetings. We table resolutions in order to change the bank's policy. We have noisy protests. We target LinkedIn ads at some of the staff. We try and find sympathizers inside the staff body. We put up silly billboards. We work with partners for more noisy protests. We will try anything, basically. We're fairly agnostic, if you like, when it comes to the tactics that we deploy. What we want to do is just get the impact. And I just want to draw your attention to a paper that came out a couple of years ago from the National Academy of Sciences in the United States. They did a paper into social tipping points. And what they meant by that is, what are the tipping points inside our society that we can hit that will then activate faster and faster and faster social change in order to combat climate change? And one of the things they highlighted in this paper was the financial system. And the reason why they highlighted that is because they noted that the financial system, when it wants to, can actually move faster than governments. So that's a key reflection, that focusing on the financial system in this way can make things happen very, very fast. There's a great essay which I encourage you to read, and we'll send these slides around afterwards, so there's no need to Google it or to take screenshots or anything, in the New Yorker by a guy called Bill McKibben, famous environmentalist, who wrote a great essay about this tactic of going after the finance. The essay was called "Money is the Oxygen on Which the Fire of Global Warming Burns." So very much worth reading that essay to get an idea of why we're doing this and why it's important and how it works. So let's talk a little bit about successes, because I want to demonstrate that what we're doing is actually working. And when I say we, I don't mean market forces, I mean the movement in general in the broadest possible sense. So a couple of headlines to demonstrate that. Guardian last year there, coal financing costs surge as investors opt for renewable energy. So as we start to remove financiers from the coal industry, coal being the dirtiest fossil fuel, it gets more expensive to finance coal. Interest rates go up. Less people want to insure the project. They don't really want to do it. So it becomes more expensive to make that happen. So that's a good reflection. Over 200 financial institutions in the world now have some restriction on the coal industry. So we need to keep growing that. New York Times article from late 2020. This was a campaign that I was involved in. 3-year campaign to stop the British government giving away subsidies for fossil fuel projects abroad, which we managed to eventually stop, force the Prime Minister to do that. There are some loopholes in that policy, but at the recent COP26 meeting, the British government managed to get about 25 other countries, including the US and Canada, to make similar commitments. So that just goes to show that one finance commitment can lead to a lot more. We know that banks are starting to drop clients if they're tied to environmental, social, or governance risk. So if clients do a lot of pollution, they're getting a bad reputation, banks might just decide to drop them. And we know that that's happening. And really encouraging headline from last year in The Guardian, most plans for new coal plants scrapped since the Paris Agreement. Fantastic report by the Global Energy Monitor think tank that demonstrated that since the Paris Agreement was signed, not necessarily because of the Paris Agreement, but most plans for new coal plants were scrapped and 3/4 of projects were discarded. And the reason for that isn't so much that the Paris Agreement was signed, it's because the climate movement worldwide has been ruthlessly chasing that money and going after financiers, going, why are you funding new coal plants? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And we're starting to make it absolutely impossible for those plants to get built. I did some work a couple of years ago in Indonesia, working with Indonesian activists fighting coal mines and coal plants. And one of the things that we heard, and this was reported in the Indonesian press, at a coal miners conference of big coal mining companies, they were openly complaining about how difficult it was getting to get finance to build new coal plants and coal mines. That's exactly what we want to hear. It means our tactics are working, and we need to extend that into oil and gas as well. So going after the money works. Talk very briefly about some frontline struggles where this is happening right now. So going clockwise from the top left there, Save Lamu campaign was an incredible campaign in Kenya, led by Kenyan villagers who were trying to stop the first coal plant from being built in that region of Africa. It's going to be built by Chinese finance and South African banks as well. And this incredible campaign in Lamu managed to beat off that campaign. So they went after the banks and the financiers. They started to make it very difficult, very reputationally damaging for those banks. And eventually the finance was withdrawn. The coal plant is not getting built. And that's really, really seminal, because the feeling was if that coal plant had gone ahead in Lamu, in a World Heritage Site, then it would have been the first of many in that region of Africa. The Stop EACOP campaign. EACOP is the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline campaign. Right now, there's this incredible global campaign going on where NGOs in the global north and activists in the global south are working together to stop the finance to build this massive crude oil pipeline that's going to stretch across to East Africa. And kind of speaks to what John was saying earlier, his question, John from Uganda, about linking up the fights. So there's been this amazing fight to make sure that they get all these banks out of funding the East Africa crude oil pipeline. On Thursday, we're speaking to Standard Chartered Bank, and this is one of the things we're going to be asking them. Are you going to fund this pipeline? Because 14 other banks have said they won't. So great work being done to stop that finance from coming online. Well, take the bottom right there, actually. This is a photograph of the Line 3 campaign in Minnesota, where Native American tribes are joining up with the climate movement to stop a gigantic oil pipeline being built across Minnesota that will go across their ancestral lands, putting their water in danger, putting their lives in danger, putting their communities in danger. So great campaign going on at the minute to chase some of the banks that are involved in financing that pipeline. Very inspiring, lots of people putting their bodies in the way. And finally, in the bottom left there, very famous and very long ongoing campaign in Queensland in Australia, where the Indian Adani Group are building a gigantic coal mine, which will have more emissions once all the coal is taken out of it than the whole of the UK. So a gigantic coal mine, one of the world's biggest. And getting that built would mean 8 similar mines being built in the same area. And there's been this great campaign that's involved all sorts of people, but particularly traditional owners. So the Indigenous people of Australia fighting that, occupying their land, making a stand. It's just been a fantastic campaign. Lots of stuff chasing the banks, the insurance companies. Really, really amazing frontline struggles that are targeting the finance there. So just to finish off, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of discussion, here's what we're up to this year. 3 key bank targets, and our key ask of these banks is that they commit to stopping the expansion of the fossil fuel industry. We've been given a great weapon in that fight by the International Energy Agency, which, it has to be said, is a bit of a conservative body. Not the type of body that you would expect to make quite radical propositions like there should not be any new coal mines or oil and gas fields or coal plants built anywhere in the world, which is something they said last year. It's a real problem for those banks because they've spent years relying on the IEA in order to justify expansion of the fossil fuel industry. Now one of their allies has turned against them. So that's our key ask for this year. No more expansion of the fossil fuel industry. And in the bottom right there, that is a photograph some of you might recognize of the Lloyd's of London building in central London. Lloyd's of London is an insurance market, and one of the key things that Market Force is interested in, as well as banks, is insurance companies, because insurance companies have been warning about climate change since the 1980s. They've been saying it's a risk that the world could become uninsurable, and yet they've continued to provide insurance cover to expand the fossil fuel industry. Really interesting target because they're not used to being in the public eye, and there's been a lot of really interesting campaigning that stopped a lot of insurance companies from insuring the coal industry. At the minute, we're trying to get insurance companies to commit to not providing insurance cover for the Adani mine that I mentioned in Australia. So far, I've managed to get 43 insurance companies to say they won't insure the mine. So we need more of that. And then from there, you build out to get proper climate policies. So key target of ours. And is that my last slide? No, it's not. Sorry, my computer froze up there. So what can others usefully do? Lots of stuff, lots of stuff. Some of the key things that I think need to be done is the UK climate policy that I mentioned that bars overseas financing for fossil fuel projects. There are some loopholes in that. For example, the UK CDC group, which is a vehicle that provides aid money for overseas, there are some loopholes in their policy which would allow fossil fuels to slip through. There's exemptions for gas power plants, petrochemicals, other things like that. So there's a public consultation due early this year. Would be really great to get those loopholes closed, because if we don't get them closed, then other countries will follow suit. Public finance for North Sea oil and gas, excuse me. So Olivia touched on this already. This is obviously a very important issue. The UK is a major extractor of fossil fuels, and realistically, probably one of the only major extractors that's going to move first in terms of stopping the new development of oil and gas fields. If we can get a first mover in that, that could be globally significant. Lots of other countries could follow. UK private banks, I've mentioned, they need to stop financing fossil fuel expansion, and also the UK insurance industry needs to stop insuring fossil fuels. And the reason why that's so important is because 55% of the world's global energy market gets its insurance cover in London. So if we can get the UK's insurance industry out of fossil fuels, then it presents a massive problem for the fossil fuel industry worldwide. So really, really key targets there. I think those are the key things that need done, if you like. And again, we'll send these slides around and we can have a discussion about this. So just finally, just to provide the website, if you want to hear more, you can sign up and get email updates. We also have a Telegram group for digital activism. So if we're going after a particular target, we like to be able to bombard them with emails, bad Google reviews, find their CEO on LinkedIn, leave 100 comments underneath them telling them they need to stop expanding the fossil fuel industry. If you're interested in taking part in that, go onto the website, sign up for our updates, and I would love to hear from you. So I think I'm over time, so I'm going to stop now. So thanks for listening and looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adam. Thanks so much for that. That was brilliant. We have time for a couple of questions if anyone would like to ask Adam some questions. Yes, Willem Buttinger again.
Yes, so me again on that same theme, right? Supply and demand. If we cut, and I'm saying agree that, we cut the supply of gas, like we see now, the cost of that goes up to the consumer, and consumers don't like it. And so how do you think the public will accept paying far higher energy prices? How will you get the public to accept that? Because the evidence on that doesn't look very good at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Willem. It's a huge question, and one that we really need to address head on. So a couple of things on that that's worth thinking about. First of all, the majority of the UK's gas extraction, the vast majority, nearly 3/4, I think I might actually be more than that, actually goes overseas. So isn't something that actually impacts our own domestic gas prices. I remember 10 years ago being really involved in some of the fights around hydraulic fracking in Northern Ireland, and one of the big arguments was, well, if we do this is going to reduce our energy bills. But pretty obvious, it became pretty obvious quite quickly that gas was just going to be sold on the international market, and it wouldn't actually affect our energy bills at all. In fact, some of the stuff that's been done over the past UK over the past 15 years, particularly on green energy levies that attach to energy bills, have actually saved us money. There's a great article in The Guardian, which I haven't actually got in front of me, that said that those green energy levies actually saved 2 billion on people's energy bills over the past 10 years, which is so interesting when you think about it, because I think we're led to believe by the media that all this green energy is a burden, it's actually increasing our energy bills, but the opposite is true. There is certainly an argument around just transition, about how we deal with the fact that right now the vast majority of us heat our homes with gas. This flat right here, it's heated with gas. You know, I don't like it, but it's just that's the deal. We do need to see a transition where we move towards air source heat, ground source heat, hydrogen in some places. All that is very doable. It just requires that political will. But that UK gas extraction piece is often used as this idea of, you know, we need to keep pumping the gas to keep the lights on. But ultimately, most of the UK's gas extraction actually ends up being sold on the international market because it's not nationalized. So Shell and BP take that gas and they just sell it to the highest bidder. There is a totally legitimate thing about relying on gas and how we've led ourselves into a situation where we are reliant on gas. The best way to deal with that problem is to provide short-term relief for people on their fuel bills. I noticed that the government of France have recently blocked EDF, Electricité de France, from putting up bills to shield customers. That type of stuff is possible in the UK given the political will. So that's the short-term thing. And the long-term thing is that we get people off gas as quickly as possible, insulate people's homes, insulate Britain, if you like, and just do everything that needs to be done to protect people. But yes, totally an issue of just transition that requires political will to deal with.